Welcome to our First Responder Awareness course about the Occupational Health and Safety Administration's, or OSHA's, Hazardous Waste Operations and Emergency Response, or HAZWOPER standard. The HAZWOPER standard applies to hazardous waste cleanup sites in industrial facilities, construction sites, and other places where there is a potential for emergencies resulting from the release of hazardous substances. Employees who work around hazardous substances may be asked to serve as first responders at an awareness level. This course will help you understand what it means to be an awareness level first responder and what you must and must not do in that capacity. By the end of this course, you will be able to recall what hazardous substances are and their associated risks, identify the role of first responders at the awareness level in emergencies that involve hazardous substances, and recognize and identify hazardous substances and potential hazards in an emergency. According to OSHA, a hazardous substance is any substance which through exposure results or may result in adverse effects on the health or safety of employees. You may see and hear people refer to hazardous substances simply as chemicals. This definition includes various forms of chemicals, such as solids, liquids, gases, vapors, mists, dusts, smoke, and fumes that cause ill health or physical hazards. Hazardous substances may be carcinogens, irritants, corrosives, sensitizers, or toxic to body systems. They may be combustible, explosive, flammable, oxidizers, pyrophoric, unstable reactive, water reactive, or radioactive. Exposure to hazardous substances may cause or add to many short and long-term health effects, such as burns, lung damage, central nervous system damage, liver and kidney damage, reproductive effects such as sterility and birth defects and cancer. Hazardous substances can be deadly. The Hazard Communication or HAZCOM standard requires employers to educate their employees about workplace chemical hazards and how to prevent injuries and illnesses due to hazardous substance exposure. Please contact your supervisor if you have not received this information or training. Your employer does not expect you to be able to memorize information about all the hazardous substances in your workplace. However, they do expect you to be able to interpret signs and labels and to find more information in resources such as safety data sheets or SDSs, shipping papers, and the U.S. Department of Transportation Emergency Response Guidebook, or DOT-ERG. Again, please contact your supervisor if you have concerns about your ability to meet these expectations or if you need additional training. True or false? Hazardous substances can cause or worsen short and long-term health effects and may also cause safety hazards, such as fires and explosions. First responders are people who encounter hazardous substances in situations such as a leaking storage tank, overturned leaking drums, an overturned truck carrying hazardous materials, a chemical fire, or a ruptured railroad tank car loaded with hazardous substances. In the HAZWOPER standard, the term first responder does not always refer to law enforcement officers or firefighters, which is how you may have heard it used outside of work. In emergencies involving hazardous substances, your employer requires its employees to follow the Company and Site Emergency Response Plan, or ERP, that they have adopted. You will receive training about the ERP that will help you understand your role and the types of hazardous substance-related emergencies to expect where you work. In this course, we'll just go over some basics to lay the foundation for your in-depth training. First responders such as you are at an awareness level. Because of your work, you may be the first to notice or discover a situation that involves a hazardous substance. Your role is simply to follow your company or site process for making notifications. This may involve calls to an emergency response team commander, site security, or other central point of contact that can dispatch other emergency responders, such as first responders at the operations level. You should not take any action to stop or clean up hazardous substances. Simply report the situation and secure the area. First responders at the operations level may take defensive action, such as covering drains or vents or remotely shutting down equipment. Hazardous materials or hazmat technicians are trained and authorized to take aggressive action to plug, patch, or stop a release. Hazmat specialists will work with technicians and coordinate other responders. They serve as the on-site experts about hazardous materials. At the highest level, an incident commander assumes control of the incident scene and oversees the entire response effort. As you can imagine, first responders at the awareness level are vital. The information they report helps to prepare everyone else in the chain of command who will take defensive and aggressive actions to contain materials, address fires and explosions, and treat victims. Which of the following actions is appropriate for a first responder at the awareness level to take? What does reporting the emergency and securing the area entail? There are some specific steps that first responders at the awareness level should take. The most important thing to remember about these steps is that your safety is paramount. Only do what can be done safely. Always work within your level of training or qualification. Do not ever endanger yourself as you complete your responsibilities. Remember to treat all unknown substances as if they are hazardous. Stay at a safe distance and keep upwind, upgrade and upstream from substances. In other words, make sure that air, water, and terrain will not carry them to you or anyone you are protecting. Your employer's emergency response plan may specify safe shelter or refuge areas and assembly points. What is the immediate priority for first responders at the awareness level when they encounter an emergency involving hazardous substances? After safety, your next priorities are to isolate the area and deny entry. The good news is that you don't have to guess about how far to set the perimeter. Your employer's emergency response plan should provide this information. In the event the substance is one you are unfamiliar with, refer to a resource such as the DOT-ERG for initial isolation and protective action distances. The DOT-ERG is already color-coded, where white pages are for basic information and instructions and the placard table. Yellow pages are an index of materials listed by ID number. Blue pages are an index of materials listed alphabetically. Orange pages are a numbered guide, and green pages have a table of initial isolation and protective actions, along with a list of water-reactive materials. After safety, your next priorities are to isolate the area and deny entry. The good news is that you don't have to guess about how far to set the perimeter. Your employer's emergency response plan should provide this information. In the event the substance is one you are unfamiliar with, refer to a resource such as the DOT ERG for initial isolation and protective action distances. The DOT ERG is already color-coded, where white pages are for basic information and instructions and the placard table. Yellow pages are an index of materials listed by ID number. Blue pages are an index of materials listed alphabetically. Orange pages are a numbered guide, and green pages have a table of initial isolation and protective actions, along with a list of water-reactive materials. From a place of safety, identify what's been spilled or is being released and assess the hazards and risk presented. We'll explain the identification and assessment process in more detail later in the course. How do first responders know how far to set the safety perimeter around an incident involving hazardous substances? After you complete the identification and assessment, it's time to pass along these details to other responders. Be prepared to provide your name, your agency, if different than the entity you notify, the location of the release, the nature of the problem, what hazardous substances may be involved and in what quantities, and any other potential hazards and helpful details such as wind direction and the direction a spill is flowing relative to drains, waterways, and terrain. We know that initial reports may not be accurate or complete. That's okay. Just calmly provide the most accurate information that you can and remain on the phone or radio in case other details are needed. After first responders at the awareness level are at a place of safety, what should they do? While you wait for help, remember to stay at a safe distance, isolate the area, and continue to deny entry. Act decisively and urgently. Your health and the health of others is at stake. Evaluate the perimeter. If flammability is a concern, then eliminate any ignition sources near the incident area, including idling vehicles, flares, and control entry points. Secure any doors, stairways, gates, intersections, on and off ramps, and so on. You may use barrier tape and cones to indicate that people should not enter the perimeter. Do not use flares when flammability is a concern. Once help arrives, they may take control of the scene and may also complete more advanced actions, such as remotely shutting down equipment. When you provide medical assistance to victims, wear proper personal protective equipment or PPE, such as gloves and masks. You must protect yourself from any hazardous substances on victims, as well as bloodborne pathogens that can cause disease. Do not provide medical care unless you know how to do so safely. Do not touch, taste, or breathe unknown materials. For example, don't assume that vapor is harmless just because it doesn't have a smell. Do not eat, drink, or smoke in the incident area or allow anyone else to do so. Contaminated food, drink, or cigarettes can make people sick. Which of the following actions is appropriate for a first responder at the awareness level to take near the incident area? How do you recognize when hazardous substances are present during an emergency? Your location alone may be enough to indicate that hazardous substances are present. For example, if you are at a plating shop or refinery when a fire breaks out, you already know that hazardous substances are present and may be involved. If you know that hazardous materials are manufactured, stored, used, or transported at your location, you know that they are likely to be present at an emergency. Use safety data sheets or SDSs, shipping papers, and other resources to identify and appropriately react to the presence of hazardous substances. Even if you are unable to access these materials during the emergency, you should know where and how others may access them. For example, shipping papers may be located where drivers, pilots, and captains operate their modes of transportation, such as cabs, cabins, and helms. Some systems may have monitors, alarms, and sprinklers that will go off in an emergency. Knowing the meaning of alarms provides useful information about the situation and substances involved. Don't assume alarms are being monitored remotely. You still need to report the incident. Use your eyes to observe and ears to listen for anything amiss. The shape, color, and construction of containers can give clues to the type and amount of their contents. For example, is a leak coming from a 55-gallon plastic drum or a ribbed metal tanker? You can use resources like the DOT ERG to familiarize yourself with types of containers and what they are used for. Check to see if you can read markings, labels, or placards on containers. These indicators may have been obscured or damaged during an incident, but you should still look for them. For example, you may not be able to read the words on it, but an orange placard may indicate an explosive material. The name of a material may not be legible, but you may be able to see and interpret the pictogram. Remember, you should receive hazard communication, hazardous materials, and similar types of training from your employer about how to read and interpret markings, labels, placards, and signs. Your employer should also explain what resources you can access to refresh your memory or find more information. Your sense of smell and taste can indicate that you may have been exposed to chemicals, as can watering eyes and coughing. Pay attention to the symptoms and condition of people who have left the release area. If possible, ask for their observations. Questions like when did you start coughing and did you notice a particular smell can help you pinpoint what hazardous substances may be present so that you can report them. Your senses such as sight and smell can alert you to the presence of some substances. Unfortunately, though, not everything is easy to sense. Invisible odorless gases and vapors that don't produce immediate irritation have poor warning properties. Some substances can overwhelm or deaden your senses. If you can't see it or smell it, you may not know it is there. Trust your common sense and instincts. If you see people running from a collapsed area, it's obvious that there is an emergency. Look for potentially subtle clues as well. Smoke, visible vapors, unidentified liquids, unusual colors or odors, a sheen on water, or the presence of fire can indicate a leak somewhere. Don't ignore the presence of dead animals or discolored vegetation or paint. Many times, a first responder will have a sense or feeling that something just isn't right. Listen to your instincts. Stay safe, observe, and report. Catching problems early can prevent property damage, injuries, and deaths. Which of the following is a question a first responder should ask people who have left the scene of an emergency to help determine if hazardous substances may be present? Once you've established that a hazardous substance is present in an emergency, it is time to proceed with identification and assessment. One of the most urgent things to determine is if the incident has the potential for fire or explosion. Ask yourself, is it on fire? Can it explode or burn? If the answer is yes, it's vital that you stay safe and that you secure the area to prevent people from being injured or killed. If you determine that fire and explosion are unlikely, it's time to focus on how else the hazardous substances can harm people. Ask, is it a gas or vapor that can come after me? If something bad happens, will it hurt me? Is it toxic? Is it flammable? Is it corrosive? Is it radioactive? You may be able to prevent injuries and deaths simply by isolating the area and denying people entry. If you can see hazardous substances, think about the stresses on the container, such as mechanical stress, pressure, extreme heat or cold, or chemical corrosion. Containers can fail catastrophically when there is a total loss of integrity. They may fracture when there is a crack, tear, or split seam. They may be punctured by mechanical stress. They may also degrade due to corrosion from excessive rust or exposure to corrosive substances. Ask yourself what may happen if the container weakens or fails. Take note of how the substance is dispersing out of the container and how that may change if the container fails. For example, substances may instantaneously release. The release may be rapid or slow. Consider the variables that may affect the situation, such as the location, date and time, weather, nature of material, and type of release. For example, if the hazardous substance is water reactive and the sky is cloudy, think about what could happen if it begins to rain. If the substance is heat reactive and it is late on a summer afternoon, will increasing ambient temperatures cause fires or explosions? In other words, Think about what may reasonably happen and what the worst-case scenario is so that you can convey that information so other responders can prepare. If you can see hazardous substances, consider the variables that may affect the situation, such as the location, date and time, weather, nature of material, and type of release. For example, if the hazardous substance is water reactive and the sky is cloudy, think about what could happen if it begins to rain. If the substance is heat reactive and it is late on a summer afternoon, will increasing ambient temperatures cause fires or explosions? In other words, think about what may reasonably happen and what the worst-case scenario is so that you can convey that information so other responders can prepare. You suspect a propane leak. Does this incident have the potential for fire or explosion? You should now be able to recall what hazardous substances are and their associated risks. Identify the role of first responders at the awareness level in emergencies that involve hazardous substances. And recognize and identify hazardous substances and potential hazards in an emergency.